Hello everyone, back tuning in to today's second video. So we've already done some spring analogues. You can find the videos out here on the homepage. Just scroll down the page a bit and it's underneath the link ads. We're looking at winter to spring analogue. So we've had a look at the winter pattern that we've had this winter for 2016-17. Been a very unusual winter in that it's been dry but mild, which is quite an unusual combination. And we've attempted to see whether there are any other years that match up with this winter, and then see what those years did in the spring. Sounds complicated, but it's fairly straightforward as you run through the video. So if you want to know more about that, do check out videos underneath the link as later on today will be placed on the spring updates and forecast page with a written post just talking about everything that we discussed in the video. This is all in anticipation of next week's spring 2017 forecast. It's going to be released here at GWV a week today. This is our Sunday roundup, so we're going to get various things together, have a look at the CISO temperature anomalies, have a look at solar activity. We'll be having a look at the Arctic constellation, North Atlantic constellation, and what's going on in the stratosphere, and weather next week, 10 days as well, so a lot to cram in, and I'll get on with it for you in a moment. Before I get on with that, just say about the ads. There's links to articles on the page. Just make sure most have a browse through widgets, click through the links. If there's any articles that you're interested in, help me us page website. Thanks very much for doing that. There's also video ads, most pages, which own content. When you watch and make those back up again, it does help to pay the gas levy. So starting off with the oceans, we're specifically interested in the Pacific, which is just here, and the Atlantic, which is over here. Let's deal with Pacific first of all. So in the equatorial Pacific, the ENSO region, we continue to see the weakening of what was already one of the weakest La Nina events ever recorded. That's on its way out. It's fading back to nothing, indicated by those continuing blue colours there, cold and average sea surface temperatures now in the western part of the equatorial Pacific, but it really is fading away very rapidly. All eyes on the eastern equatorial Pacific now, off the coast of Chile and down to Peru. Because we've got warming occurring there through that eastern part of the equatorial Pacific Ocean. Now, these are quite shallow waters, so it doesn't necessarily mean that we're on our way into a renewed warm event, a renewed El Nino. They are very much responsive to temperature in the atmosphere, the shallow waters off the coast of Chile and Peru. So they do warm and cool quite rapidly. But a lot of the modelling at the moment is going towards a re-emergence of at least a weak to moderate El Nino by the summer. So this might be the start of El Nino beginning to come back. In the northern part of the Pacific Ocean, we've got these colder average sea surface temperature anomalies. Now, you'll remember over the past 2 or 3 years, it's been pretty warm up here in the northeastern Pacific Ocean, around Alaska and down into Canada and North America. This year, quite different. This winter, quite different. It's turned cold up there. It's typically quite a cold place. So actually, this is more like what you'd expect to see in the northeastern Pacific Ocean. As I've been saying over the past few years, it tends to be a fairly cold place up there. So the years that we've had over the past 2 or 3 years where we've had a lot of warm waters, up there are warmer than average waters, is actually a bit unusual. And what we see there now is more like what you'd expect. Because it's turned cold in the northern Pacific, I think we're going to struggle. If we do get El Nino taking off again, I think we'll struggle to get a really big event. So I would anticipate, you can never guarantee anything, but I would anticipate if we do have a re-emergence of El Nino through the summer and into the second half of this year, it won't be the Super Nino that we had taking off in 2015, because the Northern Pacific was much warmer then compared to what it is now. So that means that we'll struggle, I think, to get a Super Nino in place. Anyway, I have much more about this next Saturday, on Saturday, when we do February's ENSO update. So if you're interested in El Nino, La Nina, and the effects it can have on weather, or that kind of thing, much more about that in February's ENSO update on Saturday. In terms of the Atlantic, very much what we've had all winter, really, so it's fairly cold in the northern part of the Atlantic, near normal through the central Atlantic, and still quite warm through the tropical part of the Atlantic Ocean. If we keep it warm in the tropical Atlantic, we might get more hurricanes appearing as we get through into the summer. But again, this isn't the kind of Atlantic pattern that is associated with colder than average winters. So the anticipation was always that the Atlantic wasn't really set up for a cold winter. I think that's followed through, certainly for Western Europe. Of course, have had a very cold winter over in the east and southeast of Europe. But for the west coast of the Atlantic Ocean, and this is probably one of the reasons why we haven't had a cold winter, just not quite right in terms of those sea surface temperature anomalies in the Atlantic Ocean. This is the GWV Weather Vid's winter season daily solar activity tracker. This has been updated by our friend James Ackrill, as always. Big thanks, James, for updating this for us. We like to keep an eye on what these sunspot numbers are doing, what these sunspots are doing on the solar disk. So a couple of weeks ago we had a fairly big spike in activity at the sort of end of January. We saw those sunspot numbers really pushing up once again. The trend since then has been downwards, and now actually the trend lines, which are indicated by the green and the orange lines there, the thick lines, they are beginning to trend back downwards again. You notice that through January they did lift up quite markedly, but now they're beginning to tick back down again. This is if we have reduced sunspot numbers. So we actually had one day there earlier on in February that was completely spotless. Generally, we are still having some sunspots, but at a lower level compared to what we saw at the end of January. We like to keep an eye on sunspots, because when we have low levels of activity, so we have many days without any sunspots, that usually occurs around solar minimum in the years just after solar minimum. When we have that sort of situation on the sun, it's associated with an increased risk of northern blocking, particularly on our side of the pole. It's less of a situation, the connection for North America and for Asia, but for the Atlantic, for Europe, there is an association between low levels of sunspot numbers, solar minimum, and getting an increased risk of northern blocking. And northern blocking is what sends the cold out of the pole and down into Europe. And so essentially when you have low levels of solar activity, it's associated with an increased chance of colder than average winters. We're heading into solar minimum. We'll probably arrive at solar minimum around 2019, so in a couple of years. And then it'll be around then and just after then, 2 or 3 years after then, but we'll have our greatest chance, doesn't guarantee anything, but our greatest chance of getting some colder than average winters. Whilst we are trending into solar minimum, though, it's not a linear process, so you do get periods such as we had back in January, where you get spikes in sunspot numbers, whilst the overall trend, of course, is moving downwards. And I think you can see that with this chart, it does go back into the summer, where we was up here with the trend lines. Now we're sort of going down into this sort of level. So we are trending down overall, but it doesn't get stop and doesn't rule out the chance of getting some days where sunspot numbers are spiking up once again. So when we get to around 2019, I think that's our greatest chance of getting some cold and average winters. We'll have several days, if not months, weeks and months really, that look like this, where we get no sunspot numbers appearing at all on the solar disk. So a couple of years and we can start thinking about an increased chance of northern blocking and colder winters. This is the temperature at 10 HPA over the North Pole. That's the highest level, one of the highest levels of the atmosphere in the stratosphere. This is from the JMA. We had our stratospheric warming at the end of January and the start of February, just here. Of course, we lowered the temperatures, reduced the temperatures then through early February, because we can't maintain those high temperatures in the stratosphere all that long. This is where we are right now, very close to average, really, for this point of the year. The grey line here is the trend line. We're very close to where we should be in terms of the temperature at 10 HPA in the stratosphere, but at 30 HPA, which is slightly lower down, we're actually seeing warming again. So again, we had that stratospheric warming at the start of February, just there. Reduce the temperature back close to average through early February. Now the temperature is lifting up once more. So whether we've ever had a response to that stratospheric warming that occurred at the end of January and the start of February, I think it's very difficult to say. We did get the Scandinavian high in for a few days in early February and brought us that spell of not overly cold easterly winds, but we did get a spell of easterly winds. Whether that was the response to the stratospheric warming or not, we can't really say. There's normally a 2 or 3 week delay on getting a stratospheric warming to getting a response in the atmosphere. So I would tend to suggest that the Scandinavian high we had at the start of February probably wasn't a response to the stratospheric warming. Actually, and we may not even have had a response to that stratospheric warming that occurred at the end of January, start of February. Yet we await a proper emergence of northern blocking, which we haven't yet seen. So the temperature is going to be lifting up again at 10 HPA. This is the forecast for the stratosphere at 10 HPA from the website meteoseal.fr. This is based on the latest run of the GFS model. Now, we know it's already warming up at 30 HPA, but as we run through the next few days, we do find, again, those red colours coming back in the coming week across Siberia, starting to push back in towards the stratosphere. So another pretty big warming is going to be taking place in the stratosphere at 10 HPA over the next week or so, finishing up on the 27th of February, 192 hours away, with really quite a warm stratosphere indeed at 10 HPA. This eventually might all translate back into northern blocking. We've certainly seen a fair amount of warming now in the stratosphere, starting at the end of January and still going on into the end of February. It might be that by the time we get through to April, we do get some genuine northern blocking, some genuine high pressure over the Arctic going down into Greenland. Of course, it might not necessarily be what we want in April, because really by the time you get through to April, you want a fairly straightforward transition into spring. So if you're still getting snow and frost, which you can certainly get in April, we had it last year, for example, even at the end of April, there was snow and frost going on. If you get that, it's probably not terribly good news, but I wouldn't be all that surprised because of how much warming we've had in the stratosphere through this second half of winter, if that was to actually happen again this spring. So this is the Arctic Oscillation observed and forecast chart. The black line here tells us where the Arctic Oscillation has been. The red lines are where the GFS ensembles forecasting the Arctic Oscillation to go. Remember, this is just an index that's reflecting the state of the atmosphere. It doesn't drive anything. A lot of people talk about the Arctic Oscillation as though it was a driver. It isn't a driver of the weather. It just tells you what the weather is doing. So around the 1st of February, very interestingly, when that stratospheric warming was going on during here, it was all downhill with the Arctic Oscillation. That's as the Scandinavian high got going, and we brought in those easterly winds. So you would look at that and assume that is an immediate response to the stratospheric warming that occurred at the end of January. It could probably just be coincidence, however. So you can never 100% say that one thing that happens in the atmosphere is directly connected to another thing. And as I said, there's normally a delay on getting a response to the stratospheric warming. So I would go more towards the idea that turning negative with the Arctic Oscillation there through early February was just a coincidence, but we'll never really know for sure. The forecast part of this shows that we're going to be staying, we've gone positive now, that's where we are right now, gone back to positive, so we lost the Scandinavian high, increase the westerly flow, and that kind of thing. The forecast is to remain positive through towards the end of February now, so this takes us to 1st of March just there. There are a few members of the GFS ensembles that are trending negative. Actually, yesterday we had a couple of yesterday evening had a couple of really cold GFS operational runs showing up for the start of March. At the moment, they're just in isolation. It's certainly not what the GFS ensembles are trending towards. and the overall trend of the ensemble is to keep the Arctic oscillation positive through to the start of March. But we do have one or two members that go quite negative there, indicating a return of northern blocking just in those ensemble members, but they aren't yet supported by the GFS ensembles overall. North Atlantic oscillation, very similar. Black line here tells us where the North Atlantic oscillation has been. Red line is where the North Atlantic oscillation is forecast to go. We're around there at the moment, which is neutral to just slightly positive. It looks like over the next week we're going to be lifting the North Atlantic oscillation up into really very positive territory, and that's where it's suggested to stay. Since the middle of December, which is just here, it's generally been a positive NAO winter, which was expected because of the sea surface temperature anomaly set up in the Atlantic this year. Was expected we will probably have a positive NAO, albeit at a lower level compared to the past few winters, and I think that has come through quite well. So it's not been like we had last year with the NAO sort of going rampant and going crazy with positivity, but it has overall been a positive NAO winter, in telling us that again the westerlies have been dominant, certainly for Western Europe. For Eastern Europe, you can't forget it has been a very cold winter in the east and the southeast of Europe, and even into the Mediterranean. These are the GFS temperature and precipitation ensembles for the next 2 weeks. We've got red line here, which is the 30-year temperature average in terms of the upper air temperatures, and it just looks like it's going to be very mild couple of weeks coming up. We have got a little cold snap coming through on Friday, which is this period just here, although even that doesn't have total agreement from the GFS ensembles. There are several members that are staying quite warm even around that period, but it only lasts a day if it does occur, and then we're off and running again with milder than average temperatures next weekend. There's a few cold outlier members as we get through into the start of March, like this period just here, so those are the members of the ensemble that we just saw with the Arctic oscillation. They're the ones that will go negative with the Arctic oscillation in early March, with a re-emergence of northern blocking. As you see, they aren't very well supported at all by the GFS ensembles. The overall trend for early March is just to keep things mild, probably Atlantic driven. Precipitation shows that we've got more rainfall coming up through the course of the coming week. Not dry weather to start off with. Second half of the week into the weekend turns wetter then, although again it isn't a very wet scenario at all, so there will be some rain coming through to the end of February, but you wouldn't look at that and say it's a very wet period by any means. So this is the GFS for Thursday, when it might turn a little bit stormy in the north on Thursday. This low pressure could bring some severe gales to parts of northern Scotland. Probably will bring quite a lot of rain through the course of Thursday. Into Friday, when we were suggested to get a bit of a cold snap, the latest run of the GFS is reducing what was already a very feeble cold snap for Friday, just keeping the wind from the west essentially. We go into next weekend, and the final weekend of February looks like a return of mild Atlantic winds, quite wet as well as bands of rain are coming in from off the Atlantic Ocean. We go through to Monday 27th of February, heading into the end of the month, and low pressure still driving in off the Atlantic, so it does look a more unsettled end to February, most definitely. We move through to day 10, which is Wednesday the 1st of March, so the first day of March and the first day of meteorological spring, looking like this with mild southwesterly winds and still probably quite wet in the north, but a lot of dry spring-like weather in the south. The ECWF looks like this for Thursday again, quite wet and windy. We do get a bit of a cold snap with the ECWF for Friday, definitely get wind into the north then, but it only lasts a day. Let's go through into Saturday and Sunday. The mild Atlantic southwesterlies are coming back, probably with some bands of rain as well. And then into the end of February, Monday 27th, still looking Atlantic driven. High pressure's trying to build over Scandinavia, but it looks like its days are numbered as the southwesterly winds very quickly break down that ridge. It's wet and windy, although by the time you get through to Wednesday 1st of March, actually a bit of high pressure is starting to build to the southeast. Yet again, that looks a very pleasant start to March. The winds from the south, we've got a ridge very close to us. You would think temperatures there are into the low to mid-teens Celsius. So start of spring does look very spring-like there with the ECMWF. However, I'll just very quickly leave you with how the GFS finished this morning. This is the very latest from the GFS 6 o'clock run. And it did get cold, so as you go through this first week of March, what happens is that heights start to push northwards. We get a ridge extending from Central Europe up towards Greenland, which you haven't seen all winter. Cold winds are pushing down into Scandinavia. Eventually, look at this, we finish up on Sunday the 5th of March with a big area of high pressure over Scandinavia and stretching out to Iceland, and the wind coming into the east, starting to drag very cold air out of the Baltic and push it our way. So by the time we finish up, as far as we can go, with 6 o'clock run of the GFS, which is Tuesday 7th of March, 384 hours away, a very, very long way out. We've got a gale force easterly wind blasting in there, and it looks like there's probably some sort of snow event taking place. So we know that idea isn't very well supported by the GFS ensembles at all. When we see the ensemble chart update for the 6 o'clock run, that will be a cold outlier, I'm quite sure about that. But it does still show that even into March, you can't rule out the chance of colder than average weather. And even the risk of some quite heavy snow. Certainly has happened before. 2013 was the last time we had a really cold and wintry March. So it's a minimum probability, but because of what's been happening in the stratosphere, we can't entirely rule out the prospect. However, the next week to 10 days certainly looks like being a mild end to what has been a mild winter, so we're going to have more Atlantic weather, probably turning increasingly unsettled as we get through to the very end of February, but staying pretty mild. After that, we'll be turning cold into March. Watch your space. That's it for now. Don't forget to check out the spring analogues, and that's all for now. Thanks for watching.